Distinguished colleagues, and I'm very humbled after this series of excellent presentations. And what I'm going to offer is simplistic, hopefully not simple-minded, and it's very much focused on a tradition, and hopefully it is a local knowledge that has some global significance. I would like to simply suggest an idea, which is of course highly debatable, about spiritual humanism, hopefully an evolving global discourse. This is rooted in one particular tradition, but some of its insights may be worth exploring. On the surface, what I'm going to talk about will have no bearing on China's promise of a peaceful rise, or whether the world, not just the first world, but India, Latin America, and many other countries would accept China as an important player in the multipolar world order, especially in the cultural arena. They cannot but accept China as an economic power or as a political presence, but I'm focusing on culture. From the perspective of the world of ideas, how can we find a path to peace and cultural understanding through dialogue among civilizations and a sustainable relationship with the earth? Depends on a new way of thinking, a new ethic, and a new cosmology. Are there any resources in this particular tradition, Confucian tradition in my case, that may help us to think through some of these issues as reference? Is spiritual humanism a viable option to emerge or re-emerge from the current Chinese ethos, which is totally dominated by the market economy? I'm indebted to the eminent Indian philosopher Ra Balasubramanian for this particular term, is that we often misunderstand what the tradition is about. His suggestion is spiritual humanism. Arguably, the most influential ideology in human history is still the Enlightenment mentality of the modern West. Of course, capitalism, socialism are variations of the Enlightenment theme. Wealth and power room large in these theories and praxis. They're, of course, basically at odds with the ways of life ever since the Axial Age civilization. And in our secular world, presumably as the result of Max Weber's characterization of this world as the process of rationalization, very narrowly conceived, secular humanism has become dominant ideology. It is common and prevalent that it now overshadows virtually all religious and ideological persuasions. For almost a century, the intellectual ethos in China has been overwhelmed by scientism, materialism, and instrumental rationalism. In this sense, I want to underscore the importance of science and technology, the importance of the market economy, the importance, of course, reasonableness and rational thinking. I'm not criticizing these important human heritage from the Enlightenment. We are desperately in need of formulating effective critiques of the unintended negative consequences of this process, sometimes characterized as the modernizing process. Aggressive anthropocentrism, imperialism, colonialism to be sure, but also a Faustian drive to dominate, and most of all, as many of my colleagues already stated, possessive individualism. This is not to deny the importance of liberty, rationality, equality, human rights, and the dignity of the individual, also derived from modern mentality. by advocating the unity of heaven and humanity, a sense of reverence toward heaven, respect and care for the earth, a fiduciary commitment, the commitment based upon trust, as the formation of a society, and even the idea of tianxia, peace or under heaven. This form of humanism underscores dialogue, reconciliation, and harmony. The opposite of harmony is uniformity and sameness. Therefore, the idea of harmony without uniformity. But a precondition for harmony is difference. These ideas resonate quite well with the value orientations of what in the last half a century feminists, environmentalists, multiculturalists, religious pluralists, and more recently communitarianists have been advocating for decades. I'm not saying all of them are necessarily right. I'm saying they suggest a new way of thinking of being human. The emergence of an ecumenical and cosmopolitan consciousness is a precondition for us to envision a truly authentic way of perpetual peace. All historical religions originating in the Axial Age and indigenous traditions throughout the world, when confronting the dual challenges of ecological degradation and dysfunctional global governance, will be compared to cultivate, in addition to their particular religious grammars of action, the language of humanism. Humanism in this sense meaning a kind of idea for global citizenship. We choose to be Christians, Buddhists, and Muslims, but inevitably we are human as well. Put differently, we choose to be humans through the Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, and many other ways, but we are obligated by the current state of the world to be responsible for the well-being of the human community as a whole. And it is popular in this sense that the most powerful Buddhist tradition in East Asia today is humanistic Buddhism, a Buddhism for life, a Buddhism that recognizes the importance of the world here and now, even the red dust. It is also in this sense that in Christian theological thinking, there's a rereading, reinterpreting the idea of Genesis and the idea of the human beings that created not have dominion over the world, but ought to play as stewardship necessary for the protection of the world. That's why St. Francis has been so much celebrated. The humanism that guides us to survive and flourish in the 21st century must broaden our intellectual horizon and deepen the moral depth of the Enlightenment mentality. And the minimum requirement is to transcend a narrowly conceived idea of secularity. An obvious example of this secular humanism is aggressive nationalism. Nationalism is a major challenge, as Robert Dalla had pointed out, to America, as many other scholars point out, to Russians, and many scholars in China pointed out to Chinese, and of course, to people of many other nations as well. The social thinker, Ashish Nandi, is deeply concerned about the emergence of Indian nationalism. For him, the true Indian patriotism is inconceivable without the voices of Gandhi and Tagore. That's true with the Chinese situation, the kind of patriotism without the voices of some of the great spiritual traditions, spiritual masters of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. China's moral crisis is closely linked to the lack of faith in something beyond the material world here and now. It is of great urgency that Chinese people, especially the young, cultivate a sense of awe or reverence toward heaven, earth, and the human world in between, and beyond wealth and power. Spiritual humanism, a holistic vision for human flourishing, can help religions to become publicly spirited. It is vitally important for Chinese political and intellectual elite to become religiously musical. This is definitely will improve Sino-foreign relationships in many other areas. It is also crucial for Chinese leaders to cultivate religious sensitivities through mutually beneficial dialogues with minorities in China in particular, such as the Buddhists, such as the Tibetan Buddhists, the non-Chinese speaking Muslims. This, in my view, goes beyond the issue of security. It strikes at the heart of the Chinese cultural identity and the global perception of China as a civilization state. Culture China, broadly defined, including Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau, Singapore, and the overseas Chinese, is now undergoing a major, even unprecedented renaissance. Sometimes people call it cultural renaissance. If you observe these particular areas, including Chinese diaspora communities as symbolic universe, underlying the economic vibrancy and the political dynamism, there's a concerted effort, of course, still very much of a minority, to recover, retrieve, restore, reconfigure, reconstruct, and renew traditional Chinese culture. These dialogical encounters with the past are encouraging. They enable Chinese to discover a rich reservoir of symbolic resources to share with the world. And the Golden Rule in the negative is an obvious example. Indeed, it's one of the most theoretically sophisticated and practically consequential principles for dialogue among civilizations. Do not do to others what you would not want others to do you. And of course, Hans Kuhn and others are also noted how this can be interact fruitfully with Christian Golden Rule of do to others what you would want others to do you. In the Chinese sense, in order to establish yourself, you have to help others to establish themselves. In order to enlarge yourself, you have to help others to enlarge themselves. By implication and international communication, in international communications, the global public good, such as environmental protection and establishment of the world order, must have precedence over exclusive national interests. I think the time is right that we engage in dialogue with core values, universal values embodied in the Enlightenment, such as liberty, rationality, legality, rights, and the dignity of the individual, should be fruitfully compared and substantially enriched by other universal values embodied in many, many spiritual traditions, such as justice, fairness, sympathy, empathy, civility, compassion, responsibility, and social solidarity. And I even, in a whimsical way, suggested that it's important for China now to learn to become Homo economicus. And real sense of Homo economicus is not simply profit-getting isolated individual. It embodies the idea of freedom, the idea of justice, the idea of rights, and idea of individual freedom. But these ideas will have to be augmented by a sense of fairness, by a sense of civility, responsibility, even a sense of decency and social solidarity, sympathy. And this reminds me that the father of economics, Adam Smith, he considered himself the author of theory of moral sentiments, rather than simply the author of the wealth of a nation. It is in this sense that the idea of sympathy as a form of feeling, which is absolutely rationalistic, certainly not, even if it is non-rational in ordinary sense, not at all irrational. An important spiritual exercise in the practice of Confucian self-cultivation is to extend our sympathetic feelings so that they can encompass an ever-extending network of human and non-human relatedness. The idea of spiritual humanism is to form one body with heaven, earth, and myriad things. And this idea for one body is not simply a romantic assertion about unity. It is an experiential understanding of our relationship to other human beings, to the world beyond. That's why Wang Yangming offers an illustration indicating that human capacity for this sympathetic resonance with the world is absolutely essential. If properly cultivated, it can be inclusive. From a cultural perspective, I envision the emerging global community to be highly differentiated by primordial ties. Therefore, the future of history strongly suggests that the international order will be multipolar. Any desire to be a regime to achieve hegemonic non-polarity will inevitably fail. So many dichotomies we're talking about are somewhat outmoded. Because of time, I really have to cut short my remarks. I call myself very much a beneficiary of Confucian Christian, Confucian Islamic, and Confucian Buddhist dialogue. So I bear witness to the idea that through these kind of dialogues and a new way of learning to be human is not only theoretically conceivable, but practically practicable. The great advances in communication and information technologies have exponentially broadened and deepened the human capacity to learn, to relearn, and to unlearn. Space and time have collapsed into a new reality of immediate accessibility to data, information, and knowledge about heaven above, earth below, and the things in between. In light of this, even the opening line of 17th century, 11th century Chinese thinker, which has always been considered as a utopian vision of brotherhood, becomes, in a way, not only understandable, but practical. In a very short quote, heaven is my father and earth is my mother. Even such a tiny creature as I finds intimacy in their midst. All that fills the universe is my body, and all that directs the universe is my nature. All people are my brothers and sisters, and all things are my companions. Then later he talked about those people who are crippled, those people who are marginalized. They are suffering brothers and sisters of us, and we need to have care and concern for them as well. And in this particular connection, in my own interreligious dialogue, I am encouraged to report that an increasing number of people are willing to consider themselves humanistic. Like I'm a humanistic Hindu, I'm a humanistic Buddhist, I'm a humanistic Jew, I'm a humanistic Christian, or humanistic Muslim. And this actually meaning, if you change the world with Confucian, that was like I'm willing to be called a Confucian Buddhist or Confucian Christian. This, of course, actually happened. It really indicates that the word Confucian should be and has been broadened and deepened to go beyond the Sinic world, or go beyond East Asia, and can embrace true cosmopolitanism. If so, we believe that many more religionists will be willing to identify themselves as spiritually humanistic. And I have to skip discussion about heaven and a number of other issues as well. But this humanistic vision presupposes that the ultimate meaning of life is realizable and ought to be realized in ordinary human existence. The life world is not merely secular, but also creative, dynamic, vital, and noble. Heaven engenders and humans complete entails partnership. Implicit in this proclamation is the idea that through human effort, heaven's creative vitality will be brought to fruition on earth. Indeed, as partners in the cosmic transformation and co-creators of an evolutionary process, we are capable of and indeed obligated to realize heaven's creativity on earth. Each one of us and our community as a whole are so intimately and inseparably connected with all other modalities of being in the cosmos that it's our human responsibility to be cosmologically responsible and responsive. There's a legend of the case of the Sage King Yu, which is comparable to the biblical story about Noah. It's rather instructive. Through his, the Sage King Yu's scientific rationality, sympathy, charisma, courage, self-sacrifice, endurance, and humility, he transformed the disastrous flood into an ingeniously designed and engineered hydraulic system. He's revered as the paradigmatic personality who brought together heaven and earth for the well-being of humanity. In a deeper sense, the wholesome development of the human is our filial reverence to heaven and our genuine respect for earth. This human reading of the way of heaven is not anthropocentric, but it is laden with moral implications. The flood is abnormal, but we are responsible for the capacity of responsible for and capable of adapting ourselves to the disaster of the flood by restoring order out of chaos. However, if we are the cause of major calamities, we should not blame heaven to fix them for us. And in this particular sense, that all natural disasters human beings have failed to deal with, often a disaster that is beyond human concern, then that's not our responsibility if the species ends. However, if the disaster is man-made, we cannot escape. And in fact, we are making all kinds of potentialities for this kind of self-destructive calamities. Now, let me conclude with a summary statement about 4 salient features of this particular humanism. And in fact, there are 4 major questions. As a comprehensive and integrated humanism, 4 dimensions of the commonly shared human experience, the self, community, earth, which means nature, and heaven, spirituality, God, Allah, are brought together to define the highest manifestation of human flourishing. Ideally, integration of the body, heart, mind, and soul, spirit of the self. And the self is always the center of relationships rather than an isolated individual. Therefore, the fruitful interaction of the self and community, not just the home, neighborhood, village, city, but nation and world, and even beyond. There's a sustainable and harmonious, at least we need to aim for a sustainable and harmonious relationship between human species and nature. And the animal kingdom, we're really part of it. Plants, trees, rocks, mountains, rivers, and air, from evolutionary perspectives, they are, in fact, our ancestors. And finally, the mutuality between human heart and mind and the way of heaven. Since 2013, a consensus has been emerging in China that GDP is a very limited and limiting measure of development. In addition to economic factors, political, social, cultural, and ecological dimensions must also be included in the overall development strategy, no matter how you define it. This broad vision compels us to think courageously and creatively about the cultural message that China is capable of delivering. Will it be open, pluralistic, and self-reflective? China is at a crossroads. It must pursue its own exceptionally unique path, but its path cannot be exclusively Chinese. even if a broad consensus is reached, China cannot afford to be nationalistic. Rather, China should live up to its own cultural and philosophical ideal to be cosmopolitan and spiritually humanistic.